A shot rang out, slicing through the heavy afternoon air, and everything changed. Natasha, a young pregnant woman, gripped the steering wheel, her heart pounding as two officers closed in. One stood firm, blocking her path, his gun aimed steadily, eyes cold and unyielding. What began as a routine accusation had turned into a moment of chilling tension, and more. Welcome to our channel, where we share powerful, gripping stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Let us know where you're watching from in the comment. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. The afternoon sun hung heavy over Port of Spain, its warmth spreading through the air, making everything shimmer with a hazy glow. It was a typical busy day outside the supermarket, with people hurrying about, loading groceries into their cars, their faces gleaming with sweat. The parking lot buzzed with activity, cars pulling in and out, shopping carts rattling over the pavement. Among the hustle and bustle, a young woman emerged from the supermarket, a small smile on her lips. Natasha, 24 years old and expecting her first baby, clutched a small shopping bag filled with toiletries. Her dress was simple and flowing, hugging her baby bump, and her hair was neatly tied back, wisps escaping to dance around her face in the gentle breeze. She had gone out to pick up some essentials, soaps, creams, lotions, all the things she needed to prepare her home for the arrival of her baby girl. She was soft-spoken but had a quiet strength about her, the kind that made her a survivor, even when life wasn't kind. Today, she felt a little bit of that strength as she headed toward her car, parked under the shade of a nearby tree. The warmth of the sun felt comforting on her face as she approached her car, her steps light, her mind drifting to thoughts of the nursery she was setting up at home. She could already picture it. The soft pastels, the crib she had chosen, the tiny clothes she had folded and put away. It was a picture of hope, of dreams, of love. She fumbled in her purse for her car keys, her heart light with anticipation of returning home to continue preparing for her baby's arrival. But as she reached out to unlock her car, her world changed in an instant. Two shadows appeared before her, blocking her path. She looked up, startled, to see two men in police uniforms, their faces stern and unyielding. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his eyes sharp, scanning her every move. The other stood slightly behind, his expression more cautious, but he followed the first man's lead. "Excuse me," Natasha said softly, trying to step around them, but they didn't move. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you," said the first officer, his voice cutting through the noise of the parking lot. His name tag read No. He was stern, and there was something almost accusatory in his tone that made Natasha's stomach churn. Natasha blinked, confused. "About what?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with uncertainty. Noah's eyes narrowed as he took a step closer. "You're suspected of shoplifting. A store employee saw you taking items without paying," he said flatly, his voice loud enough for people nearby to hear. Natasha's heart skipped a beat. "What? No, that's not true," she said, her voice shaking as she quickly rummaged through her bag, pulling out the receipt. "I paid for everything. See." She held up the slip of paper, her hands trembling, the receipt fluttering slightly in the breeze. Her eyes darted between the two officers, trying to read their expressions, trying to understand why this was happening. Noah glanced at the receipt but showed no interest in it. "Step out of the car, ma'am," he said, his tone cold and unyielding, as if he hadn't heard a word she'd said. Natasha's fear began to turn into panic. "But I didn't do anything wrong," she said, louder this time, her voice cracking. "I paid for everything, I swear. I don't understand." "I said get out of the car," Noah repeated, cutting her off. His eyes bore into hers, unrelenting. He stepped closer, his presence towering, intimidating. Beside him, Richard, the second officer, shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if he wasn't sure what to do. But he stayed silent, following Noah's lead. Natasha's heart pounded in her chest. She felt trapped, surrounded, and no matter how much she tried to explain, they weren't listening. "Please," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper now. "I'm just trying to go home." But Noah didn't care. He had already made up his mind. Without warning, he pulled out his gun, the metal glinting in the sunlight, and stepped directly in front of Natash's car, blocking her path. The sight of the weapon sent a jolt of fear through her entire body. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, as she tried to keep her breathing steady. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, I'm pregnant. I just want to go home." Noah's face was set, rigid, and for a moment there was a chilling silence between them. Then he lifted the gun, pointing it straight at her. "Get out of the car now," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Natash's eyes filled with tears. She felt a wave of panic, of desperation, but she knew she had to stay calm. She couldn't make any sudden moves. Slowly, she turned the steering wheel, inching the car forward, trying to avoid hitting Noah without making him feel threatened. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, just let me go." But Noah's eyes were hard, his finger tightening on the trigger as he took a step forward. Natasha saw it happen almost in slow motion, the way his arm tensed, the way the barrel of the gun seemed to shine brighter. And then there was a deafening bang. The bullet shattered the windshield, striking Natasha. Her body jerked, and her hand slipped from the wheel. Her car, no longer guided, rolled forward slowly, coming to a gentle stop near the sidewalk. For a moment, there was a stunned silence, and then the parking lot erupted into chaos. People screamed, some pulling out their phones to record, others running for cover, unsure of what had just happened. Natash's vision blurred, her mind struggling to process the pain, the shock. Her last thoughts were of her baby girl, the life she had been so excited to bring into the world, now slipping away from her. And as her eyes closed, the sun dipped behind a cloud, casting a shadow over the parking lot, as if the world was mourning her loss. The tragic encounter was over in moments, but it left behind a wound that would not easily heal, a tragedy that would echo through the hearts of everyone who saw it, and those who would soon hear about it. The news of Natash's death spread like wildfire through the streets of Port of Spain, carried on whispers, gasps, and disbelief. In a matter of hours, everyone knew the story of the young, pregnant woman who had been shot in broad daylight. The tragic event left the community reeling, unable to comprehend how something so horrible could happen to someone so gentle and full of life. Among the many voices raised in shock and anger, one stood out, broken and filled with pain. Olivia, Natash's 65-year-old grandmother, was sitting at her kitchen table when she received the call. She could barely process the words being spoken on the other end. It felt as if her heart had been ripped out of her chest, leaving a hollow, aching emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. Olivia had raised Natasha since she was a little girl, after her mother's untimely death. Natasha was more than just a granddaughter. She was Olivia's world, her joy, her pride. And now she was gone, along with the unborn baby girl that Natasha had been so excited to bring into the world. Olivia's home, once a quiet, peaceful place filled with warmth, now felt cold and empty. She wandered from room to room, picking up pieces of Natasha's life. A baby blanket Natasha had bought, a framed ultrasound picture of her unborn granddaughter, a pair of tiny pink shoes she had proudly shown Olivia just a few days before. Olivia's heart broke all over again with each small reminder. How could it be that the person she had loved and cared for, the one she had seen grow into such a kind, beautiful young woman, was now gone? As Olivia struggled with her grief, the police released their official statement. According to them, Noah, the officer who shot Natasha, had acted in self-defense. They claimed that Natasha had tried to run him over, forcing him to make a split-second decision to protect himself. The statement painted Natasha as a dangerous suspect, someone who had posed a threat. It was a version of events that didn't match the Natasha Olivia knew, the gentle, hopeful woman who had been counting down the days until she could meet her baby girl. The police refused to release the names of the officers involved, citing legal protections. Noah was placed on paid administrative leave, while an internal investigation was promised. Richard, the second officer, remained silent, standing by Noah's account of what happened. To some, the police's narrative made sense, but to others, it raised too many questions. As the days passed, the community began to divide, some accepting the police's story, while others couldn't help but feel there was more to it. Judge Patrick, Netesh's uncle and a respected chief judge, was among those who refused to accept the police's version of events. Despite his grief, he was determined to uncover the truth. He knew his niece better than anyone, and he couldn't believe that she would have acted aggressively. To him, it was clear that something was wrong, and he wasn't going to let this case be swept under the rug. He began his own investigation, gathering witness statements, talking to people who had been at the scene, and demanding access to the supermarket's surveillance footage. He used his legal expertise to put pressure on the authorities, making it clear that he wasn't going to back down. As Judge Patrick worked tirelessly, the community rallied around him. People gathered outside the police station, holding candlelight vigils and protests, their faces solemn and resolute. Some held up signs that read "Justice for Natasha" and "Say her name," while others chanted, demanding accountability. For many, Natasha's story had become a symbol of something much bigger: the need for justice, the fight against misuse of power, and the call for truth. The vigils grew larger each night, drawing people from all walks of life, united by a shared sense of loss and a desire for justice. But as the community's calls for truth grew louder, so did the pushback. Rumors began to spread, and tension escalated. Some defended the officers, insisting that they were simply doing their jobs and had to make a quick decision in a dangerous situation. Others whispered about corruption, about how authorities might be protecting their own. The more people talked, the more complicated the story seemed to become. The atmosphere was thick with unease, and it felt like everyone was waiting for the truth to emerge, waiting for the storm to break. Olivia watched all of this from the sidelines, her heart heavy. She was too old to march in the protests, too tired to shout in anger, but she found strength in seeing so many people come together for Natasha. It gave her hope, even in the darkest moments of her grief. She couldn't stop thinking about the last time she had seen her granddaughter, the way Natasha had smiled at her and gently placed Olivia's hand on her baby bump, letting her feel the tiny kicks. "She's going to be strong, just like you," Natasha had said with a laugh. Olivia had never imagined that would be the last time she would see that smile. Judge Patrick, facing resistance from the police and legal barriers, refused to give up. He knew that the longer the truth was hidden, the harder it would be to get justice for Natasha. Every step forward felt like pushing against a mountain, but he kept pushing. As he fought for answers, the tension continued to build, and the city held its breath, caught between hope and despair, as they waited to see what would happen next. Would the truth come out? Would there be justice for Natasha? Or would her story fade away, lost in a sea of rumors and accusations? The answers were still unclear, but one thing was certain: the fight was far from over, and those who loved Natasha would not stop until they had the truth. Weeks had passed since Natasha's tragic death, and the community's cries for justice had only grown louder. Despite the police department's attempt to control the narrative, something didn't sit right with the people of Port of Spain. Judge Patrick had been relentless, pushing for transparency, demanding the truth, and refusing to let his niece's death be buried under lies. The pressure was mounting, and it was about to reach a boiling point. After weeks of legal battles and public protests, the court finally ordered the release of the surveillance footage from the supermarket. People gathered outside the courthouse, their eyes fixed on the screens of their phones, waiting for the video to be shared. When it was finally made public, the footage hit like a bolt of lightning, illuminating the truth in stark, undeniable clarity. The video showed Natasha calmly walking through the aisles, picking up soaps, creams, and other toiletries. She wasn't hiding anything, not stuffing items into her bag, as the accusations had suggested. She carried her basket to the checkout counter, paid for everything with cash, and left the store with a small smile, heading back to her car. It was all there, clear as day. There was no sign of theft, no hint of wrongdoing. Natasha was innocent. The revelation spread quickly, tearing through the police's narrative like a knife through fabric. Social media lit up, news channels played the footage on loop, and people shared it with captions like, "Justice for Natasha," and "The truth will prevail." The community was stunned, outraged, and heartbroken all at once. Natasha hadn't been a criminal. She had been a victim. A young, pregnant woman whose life was unjustly taken because of a false accusation. The lies were exposed, and now everyone could see the truth. But the story didn't end there. The twist that no one saw coming unfolded when Richard, the second officer, decided to break his silence. He had been haunted by the events of that day, replaying them over and over in his mind. For weeks, he had kept quiet, backing Noah's version of events, but the guilt was eating him alive. He knew what he had seen, and he couldn't keep lying. Not to himself, not to the people demanding answers, and certainly not to Natasha's grieving family. Richard stepped forward, his voice trembling as he made his confession. In a public statement, he admitted that Noah had violated police protocol by standing directly in front of Natasha's car, blocking her path. "We were trained not to stand in front of moving vehicles," he said, his eyes downcast, struggling to maintain his composure. Noah had the chance to move, to de-escalate, but he chose not to. Instead, he drew his gun, and it didn't have to happen that way. He could have moved out of the way, but he didn't. Richard's words sent shockwaves through the community. For weeks, Noah had been portrayed as a law enforcer who acted out of necessity, but now Richard's confession revealed a darker truth. Noah had been aggressive, reckless, and instead of following protocol, he had escalated the situation. Richard also revealed that he had been pressured by his superiors to support Noah's story, to keep the department's image intact. "I'm ashamed of myself," he said, his voice shaking. "I stayed silent, but I can't do it anymore." Natasha deserves the truth. The community's response was swift and powerful. The revelation ignited a wave of rage and sorrow. People took to the streets, their voices raised in protest, their faces filled with anger and determination. Signs reading "Justice for Natasha," "Accountability now," and "Say her name" bobbed above the crowds, and the streets of Port of Spain were flooded with people demanding change. News channels covered the story around the clock, and the footage of Natasha shopping, along with Richard's confession, played repeatedly, ensuring no one could ignore the truth. Judge Patrick, who had been fighting tirelessly since the day Natasha was killed, now had the evidence he needed. With the surveillance footage and Richard's testimony, he filed a lawsuit against the police department, accusing them of gross misconduct, corruption, and the unlawful killing of his niece. He didn't just want justice for Natasha. He wanted to see Noah held accountable, to see the department acknowledge their wrongdoings and change their policies, so that no other family would have to suffer like his did. As the lawsuit was filed, the people of Trinidad watched with bated breath, hoping this would be the moment they had been waiting for. Olivia, Natasha's grandmother, stood quietly at home, watching the news coverage with tears in her eyes. She had lost so much, but for the first time since that terrible day, she felt a flicker of hope. The truth was finally out, and people were listening. Her granddaughter's name was being spoken, not as a suspect, but as a victim who deserves justice. "This is for Natasha," Judge Patrick said, standing outside the courthouse after filing the lawsuit. "We won't stop until we have justice. We won't stop until every lie is exposed, and every person responsible is held accountable." Natasha was innocent, and she deserves to be remembered that way. The revelation had brought the truth to light, but it had also set off a chain reaction, a movement fueled by hope and a demand for justice. The people stood behind Olivia and Judge Patrick, ready to see this fight through to the end. The truth had finally unraveled, and now there was no turning back. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with anticipation. Every seat was filled, and even more people stood in the aisles, leaning against walls, their eyes fixed on the front where the trial of Officer Noah was unfolding. Judge Patrick, standing tall and resolute, had spent days presenting the case, each word he spoke carrying the weight of truth and the promise of justice for his niece, Natasha. The surveillance footage, Richard's brave confession, and testimonies from witnesses painted a clear picture, shattering the false narrative that had been spun after her death. Supporters of Natasha filled the room, wearing shirts bearing her photo, holding signs that read, "Justice for Natasha," and "Protect our women." Many had been there every day of the trial, a testament to the community's resolve to see justice served. Noah's lawyer tried to argue self-defense, depicting Noah as a man who had made a tough decision in a difficult moment. But the evidence was overwhelming. Video footage showed Natasha calmly shopping, paying for her items, and walking out. Richard's emotional testimony laid bare the truth. Noah had chosen aggression when there was no threat, and Natasha had been caught in the path of his recklessness. As the trial came to a close, the courtroom held its breath. The judge's voice echoed in the silence, clear and steady as he read the verdict. "Guilty," he said, finding Noah guilty of murder and unlawful use of deadly force. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and the court ordered the police department to review and revise their use of force policies to prevent such tragedies from happening again. The moment the words were spoken, the room erupted. Applause and cries of relief filled the air, echoing down the halls of the courthouse. People hugged each other, some weeping openly, their tears a mixture of sorrow and vindication. Natasha's supporters had stood by her side, even after she was gone, and now they had a victory that was as much for them as it was for her. In the midst of the celebration, Olivia, Natasha's grandmother, sat quietly, her hands trembling as she clutched a photo of her beloved granddaughter. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but for the first time in weeks, there was a faint, sad smile on her lips. "This is for you, my sweet girl," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with love. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, waiting for news. Judge Patrick stepped out, flanked by reporters, his expression a mix of triumph and sorrow. "This is for Natasha," he said, his voice breaking slightly but strong. "She may be gone, but her story will change lives. We will not stop fighting until every woman, every child, and every soul is safe from reckless power." The victory was a message, not just to those who had known and loved Natasha, but to every person who had ever been hurt by a system that failed them. It was a promise of change, a pledge to keep fighting. The story did not end there. Days later, a mural was unveiled in a quiet corner of Port of Spain, painted by local artists who had been touched by Natasha's story. It showed her smiling, her hands gently cradling her baby bump, surrounded by soft colors and blooming flowers. Beneath the image, the words "Her light lives on" were written in elegant script. People came to pay their respects, leaving flowers and candles, their faces solemn but hopeful. Olivia visited the mural often, standing before it, lost in thought. As she watched children running and laughing nearby, she felt a strange comfort. Life continued, even after so much loss. Natasha's story had sparked something that could not be undone. It was not just a fight for justice, but a legacy of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the truth could bring light, and that light would shine forever in the hearts of those who knew her, those who fought for her, and those who would never forget. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories to life.